thank you so much for joining me and for being the inaugural person that I'm chatting with for the Women Rising Collaborative. It's so great to be here, and I really am so excited to share what I've experienced working with you. And it feels as though there's this secret out there that I'd like to spread and share with others, that during those 2 weeks of every month, you can actually feel relatively good and balanced and strong and vital, just as you do the other 2 weeks. So for as long as I can remember, for 2 weeks of every month, I felt capable, energetic, on my game. And then for 2 weeks of the other 2 weeks, I have felt exhausted, in pain, back pain, belly pain, cramps, headaches, night sweats, breast tenderness. And for the 10 days leading up to my menstrual cycle, I just felt awful overall. And I remember feeling that for as long as I can remember. And I remember feeling and thinking, well, this is just the way it has to be. And then we connected, and you let me know that actually there are very simple, gentle ways we don't have to feel this way. There are ways to feel good during this time. And so thank you. And I'd love to explore with you what is happening in our bodies during this decade hormonally, and what can we do to feel good as we can all month. So
yes, all month long. That's the
all
goal.
month long. So maybe we start with sort of setting the stage. What is happening to us, Dr. Taylor, hormonally around the age of 40 and beyond?
Yeah. And thank you so much for having me here and interviewing me and sharing this message. As you said, I'm so passionate about helping women to connect with their bodies and their hormones and understand kind of what's going on, so that they can feel good all month long, as you said, because that really should be how we feel as women. And so let's chat about hormones in our 40s. And so, in our 40s, this can be a decade of really great hormonal change. If we kind of take a step back and we think, of all the big milestones of our kind of menstrual life,
Mm-hmm.
The average age of first menstruation is 12 years of age. Mm-hmm. And it really, I'm sure we can all look back and remember that it does take quite a few years for our bodies to kind of regulate out, for our hormones, our periods to become regular. Mm-hmm. There can be some kind of hormonal ups and downs through that phase. Mm-hmm. And really it's about your body, the brain, and ovaries kind of creating this communication, and that becoming more regular and more consistent. So then we look at the next, kind of big phase, and we think about the average age of menopause, which mm-hmm. is 51. So we're looking at like the other end, and that's 1 full year without a menstrual cycle. So that's generally the age of 51. But there's going to be this whole transitionary period called perimenopause, mm-hmm. which is when our body is transitioning and the communication also between the brain and the ovaries is changing, mm-hmm. As we get to that final menstrual period. Mm-hmm. And so every woman's experience is going to be completely different. So mm-hmm. for some women, they really only notice big changes and symptoms kind of around that time, so maybe late 40s, early 50s. Mm-hmm. For some women, it's going to be more mid-40s or earlier. And then some women just kind of sail through that last menstrual period and don't even really notice a difference. Oh. So the experience is different for all of us. But basically what's happening in our 40s as we're kind of ramping up to this change, mm-hmm. Is that the number of viable ovarian follicles is declining. Mm-hmm. And so with that, our hormones are changing. So the amount of hormones produced, namely progesterone and estrogen. So progesterone generally is the first one that we see declining. Mm-hmm. And this can happen we kind of can divide it between early perimenopause and late perimenopause. So we definitely see progesterone declining first, and then estrogen is actually kind of wildly fluctuating up and down through perimenopause. So, and it's these kind of big swings that can be a bit problematic for us if we don't know how to kind of manage them and balance them. So that's kind of what's happening like behind the scenes in terms of our hormones. And then things that we start to notice is cycles can change in length. So typically if you were like a 28 to 30 day cycle, it might shorten a bit at first. So like 24 to 26 days. And then as you move towards this, get into the later transition, periods can become further apart. So maybe 60 days longer than that. Even the amount of bleeding can increase. So like the heaviness of the flow can increase. So maybe you typically had a period for 5 days and maybe now it's closer to 7 days and it's heavier. A lot of that has to do with the loss of progesterone, because progesterone is it matures and maintains the endometrial lining, and it also balances out the effects of estrogen, because estrogen is very stimulating, right? So the other kind of things that we see, which is what you were alluding to as well, is those premenstrual symptoms, so the breast tenderness, the mood swings. Sometimes we do see those intensifying with these greater hormonal swings, right? So that's something that we might notice. And then again, as we progress through and we get more to those estrogen deficiency stages, maybe more the vasomotor symptoms, so night sweats, hot flashes, things like that, which we can see those peaking through earlier as well. I know that sounds awful, like, not great, but it's just good to understand like what's kind of happening.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's about understanding. It's about like the empowerment of kind of understanding what's happening 100%. In your body, and then knowing that there are things that we can do to help balance out those ebbs and flows, but just from like a bigger picture of what's kind of happening in our 40s.
So that's so helpful, and so it sounds like there's sort of two strands or somewhat connected, but also maybe separate. Is that even before those big hormonal changes in our 40s, we can be off balance. And I love the way that you're talking about, you know, that communication between the ovaries and the brain. And so so those painful symptoms, are those a sign that we are in some ways off balance?
So when we think specifically about PMS in particular, so PMS is when we see those symptoms in the week or two before our period, so it's after ovulation, before our period comes. It's a mixture of physical symptoms, bloating, breast tenderness, water retention, and emotional symptoms. So mood changes, mood swings, things like that. That is very much, it's so interesting because it's not necessarily a hormonal imbalance, so to speak. So if we measured your blood work, it's not going to show, you know, you're estrogen dominant or you don't have enough progesterone, but it's really about how your body is responding to the hormonal changes. So that's when it becomes very much how our nervous system and our hormonal system is intertwined. And so some of us are more susceptible to PMS. Not every woman is, right? Some women are and some women aren't. So it is about kind of addressing that link between the nervous system and the hormonal system for those PMS symptoms.
That's so interesting, because you know what I've noticed recently is now that I've overall, with your help, started to feel so much better, the one thing I do still realize is that during those 2 weeks, the 2 weeks of PMS, there is in me sort of the slight undercurrent of anxiety that I don't typically feel in the same way during the other 2 weeks. So interesting that there's that connection between the hormonal and the nervous system.
And there are like very kind of specific like treatments available for women who do experience those premenstrual symptoms. So for sure, like if someone's experiencing those symptoms that I described and they're really affecting quality of life and stuff, you want to seek medical care and a naturopathic doctor or something like that in order to kind of look into what treatments are available for that. But also, I do think of it as it is also being in connection with our body and really tuning in and using that as like kind of a marker of how well you're really taking care of yourself, right? Because the more that you are in tune with your body and you're helping, you're managing your stress response, not taking all the stress out of your life, because that's just impossible. We all know that, especially over this past year, we cannot control the stress in our life. Yeah. But it's all about how we're managing it. And there are, like, the way that our hormones are changing through the month does make us more, in that week or two before the period, we are a bit more intuitive and more connected to ourselves. And I almost think of it like, when you're, what you want and you know what you don't want. When, it's like if you need to put some boundaries up, your body's kind of speaking to you in that way. So I do like thinking about it kind of in that way too.
I would agree too. There's a real clarity in it. And I think, there's a little bit of, well, you're PMSing, so don't give too much credence to what you're thinking or feeling. But perhaps, in fact, this is the clarity that I've been seeking on X, Y, or Z, and now it's just very black and white because the signals are that much clearer and stronger in some ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess for women who do experience some of those more adverse PMS journeys, as I was prior to starting what we've been working on, can the 40s and what you had described that can happen hormonally exacerbate those PMS symptoms? And then, of course, the question that I think everyone's interested in is, what can we do to feel better, to reduce those symptoms, and to feel as good as we can?
Yeah. Yeah, and an important point too. So I do see that in the 40s, for some women, those kinds of symptoms do get worse. So the things like breast tenderness can increase. A lot of that has to do as well with the loss of progesterone, because that's very, like I had mentioned, it helps to balance out the effects of estrogen. And then the mood changes too. So this is a huge piece of perimenopause. So progesterone very much acts on our GABA receptors, which is a very calming neurotransmitter. Estrogen influences serotonin, which we think of, that like feel good neurotransmitter. So with those hormonal changes that can happen through perimenopause, we can see increase in anxiety, insomnia, even low mood, depressive episodes. And I think this is a real area of our health as women that it's really important that we understand how hormones can affect those changes, so that we can seek the right treatment and the right care to understand that our hormones and our mental health are very much connected. So that is what I see. So those symptoms can definitely get worse for some women. And then, so let's talk about the things that we can do in order to kind of help us through this decade, through these hormonal changes. So the first thing I always say for women is we have to start tracking our cycles. And, if you haven't been tracking your cycle or haven't been tracking it in depth, like the 40s, why not? It's a great time to get to intimately understand your own hormonal ebbs and flows through the month, and how that makes you feel. And like we've been speaking of, it gives you so much, you can be so much more in tune with your own ebbs and flows and intuition and rhythm. So I recommend tracking, when you're getting your period, how long it is, how heavy it is, any of those premenstrual or mood symptoms. And the other thing this does is, just like as we progress through our 40s, it does help give us insight into when things are changing. Because data shows that we're actually not great at like looking back and remembering exactly, how intense were our premenstrual symptoms last month? Did they actually occur in the premenstrual time, or were they around ovulation? Like, we don't remember that. So tracking gives us a lot of information. Then, as we've been talking about a lot in terms of this connection between our hormones and our stress response system, is really, in your 40s, let's make it a dedicated practice to really nurture that and nourish that stress response system in our body. So it's our HPA, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And it's like this bi-directional, right? Like our hormones affect our stress response system and vice versa. Because in our 40s, like these big hormonal swings, especially of estrogen, that's a stress on the body, right? Like when hormones are kind of fluctuating like that. So, let's make it simple and do like dedicated 10 minutes a day to nourish our stress response system. So to get into our parasympathetic rest and digest system. So, even 10 minutes. So whether it's, lying on the floor with your legs up on the wall, I think that that's a great restorative posture. You just lie there and it feels amazing. A hot bath, a walk outside around the block, maybe journaling, guided meditation, or just setting a timer and breathing for 10 minutes, but just, a 10-minute chunk of day that's kind of dedicated to your self-care and to help relax your nervous system. Then the last kind of easy, let's add in this, we can start it right away, which I'm sure I talked to you about, was adding in flax seeds into your diet. So 2 tablespoons of flax seeds a day. And why this is so great is because fiber is really, really important, and we're generally just not getting enough fiber as people living in today's day and age. And fiber is really important so estrogen is metabolized through our liver, and then it's excreted through our bile, and fiber helps to bind to that and to get it out of our body. So it's going to help to remove metabolized estrogens out, which is really important. Supports gut microbiome, which is important for overall health. And then flax seeds in particular are also have a phytoestrogen quality to them, so they help to kind of balance out estrogen receptors. So they have a modulating effect on estrogen receptors. So as a starting point is like a couple kind of things that you can start doing today. Those are a couple things.
That's so helpful. Thank you so much. And I think, within the discourse of self-care and excuse me, I'm just thinking about all the women I know, and I feel that 10 minutes is doable, and 2 tablespoons of flax seeds, that's doable, because there's, we occasionally will hear about treatments or suggestions for self-care that are not attainable or achievable for most people, but I feel like those are 2 that I've certainly started to incorporate over the last few months, and that can be accessed by hopefully everyone who is on this community.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's not the 10,000 things you have to do for your morning routine before you start work at 9 a.m., which, I mean, if you have kids at this stage and you have a busy career at this stage, it's just, it's not possible, but you can make the 10 minutes for yourself to kind of, and to kind of get into that parasympathetic state. Well,
thank you so much for... I'm going to throw in a funny, just random question to end it off.
Yeah.
Okay. So what have you been watching lately? Do you watch TV at all?
Yes.
Okay. For years I didn't, so I don't want to assume, but yeah. What have you been watching?
TV is so amazing these days. The quality of what is being produced is so amazing. So I actually do love TV. I'm a big reader for sure. I love novels, but I do find that TV can be great at the end of the day to just to me, I make it more about, I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but I do, because I think that it's also about the intention that you bring to activities too. So I do, at the end of the day, after my daughter's in bed, my husband and I love a good quality TV show that we're watching, and even just half an hour to 40 minutes. And the intention, I bring an intention to it where it's okay, I'm going to turn off my mind and kind of go into this other world. And then I'll read my book after and do my nighttime routine. So I'm a big fan of TV. So actually what I'm watching right now is For All Mankind, which is a show on, I think it's on Apple TV, and it's about women astronauts going to the moon, and it's really cool. I'm loving it. So just started that one.
That sounds amazing. Is it fictional, or is it based on actual?
No, so it's a story. It's fictional, but they've kind of done it if they use parts of history that actually happened, but then kind of change it. So it's if the states hadn't gone to the moon first, or if women hadn't gone to the moon first. So it's kind of using both, which I think is cool too, because they have clips of Nixon and things like that in there. So
that sounds so cool. But we're big into space in my family right now, because my son is space obsessed, and he's 6 years old, but he is sure that he wants to be an astronomer, not an astronaut.
Aw.
But also he's read all the encyclopedias and he watches documentaries. So this is right. Thanks for the suggestion. I might have to watch that. So thank you so much for chatting with me. This has been amazing.
Oh, of course. It was such a pleasure to chat with you on this topic. And like I said, I think it's so important to get this information out there for women. And yeah, so I'm just thrilled to be part of it.
Thank you. Enjoy your Friday.
Okay, you too.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.